Welcome back. Let's pick up with the sacrifices. And I'm going to read through these descriptions fairly quickly because I'm assuming that you're going to have your PowerPoint printed up and you'll have it next to you so that you can see it. The first offering is the Olah, O-L-A-H. It means the whole burnt offering, and we find it in Leviticus 1 3 through 17 and 6 8 through 13. Olah is also the word where we get Olah cost or Holocaust. It just means to be completely consumed with fire. The purpose of the whole burnt offering is to atone for human sinfulness. The kind of offering that would be brought is a male without blemish from the herd or flock, or two birds. Now, whether it was a male from the flock or two birds would depend on your financial status. The offering would be completely burned. The offerer would bring the offering. The offerer would place their hand on the sacrifice, slay the animal, skin the animal, and cut it into pieces. So you can see that the offerer had quite a bit of participation in what they brought to offer. They just didn't drop off a sacrifice and then go along their way. To make an offering was costly, it was time consuming, and it required a lot of the person actually doing the offering. The priest would accept the offering, throw blood against the altar, and then place pieces on the fire, and then wash the entrails and the legs. Next, we have the hatat, or the sin offering. Now, hatat is one of the four major words in Hebrew for sin, and hatat means to miss the mark. This is not an intentional, ongoing, belaboring sin. This is a sin where you have just blown it, and you need to get things cleaned up between yourself and God. That's found in Leviticus chapter 4, 1 through 5, and 13, and then chapter 6, verses 24 through 30. It would be, if it were the priest bringing an hatat, he would bring a bull. If it was a member of the congregation, a young bull. If it was a ruler, it would be a male goat. If it would be just a regular member of the congregation and not a leader, it would be a female sheep or goat. If it was a poor person, two birds. If it was a very poor person, a handful of flour. The nature of the offering is that the fatty portions would be burned and the remainder would be eaten. The offerer would bring the offering, and if the elder was doing this for the entire congregation, then the elder would bring the offering. The priest would accept the offering, throw the blood against the altar, burn the fat, eat the meat, and if it was their own sin that they were dealing with, then they would have to burn their portion outside the camp. The asah, or the guilt offering, is the third offering, chapter 5, verses 14 through chapter 6, verse 7, and then chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. The purpose of the asah offering is to atone for a sin that required restitution or a breach of faith that had taken place. It's the same as the sin offering, plus the specified restitution. So if you had stolen $20 from your next door neighbor, you would not only bring the offering, but you would also bring the $20 plus interest to the priest. The offer is the same as the sin offering plus restitution. The action of the priest would be the same as the sin offering plus the restitution. The next offering, the fourth offering, is the minna, or the grain or cereal offering. This is in chapter 2, verses 1 through 16, and chapter 6, verses 14 through 23. The purpose of this grain or cereal offering is to retain goodwill. Fine flour or cakes or wafers or first fruits with oil, frankincense, and salt, but no leaven or honey, and this is usually accompanied by an animal sacrifice. A token of this offering would be burned. The offerer would bring the offering and take a handful. The priest would burn a handful and then keep a bit of it for himself and his family to eat. The last offering is the Salamim, or the Shalomim offering, the peace offering. Chapter 3, verses 1 through 17, chapter 7, verses 11 through 21, and then 28 through 36. The purpose of the peace offering is to render praise to Yahweh. It would be a male or a female from the herd or the flock, of course without blemish. The fatty portion would be burned, the remainder would be eaten. The offerer would bring the offering, place their hands on the head of the offering, slay, skin, cut into pieces, eat the remainder that day or the next day. The priest would accept the offering, throw blood against the altar, burn the fatty portions, and then eat the remainder that day. lots of detail for these offerings. I think the detail and just the weightiness of these offerings, if it does nothing else, it should remind us of this: God takes sin very seriously. Sin is not something to be taken lightly or to be dealt with flippantly or to just be passed over as an oh by the way. Sin is an offense to a holy God, and it is so offensive to him and so serious to him that he would send his own son to die as a sacrifice so that you and I could be called the righteousness of God in Christ and be in a right relationship with him. God takes sin very seriously, and so should we. The offerings or sacrifices are listed in the book of Leviticus in this order. Chapter 1 is Olah. Chapter 2, Olah, whole burnt offering. Chapter 2, the Minha, or the grain offering. Chapter 3, the Shalamim, or the peace offering. Chapter 4, the sin, or Hatat. And Chapter 5, the guilt, or Asam offering. However, when the sacrifices are not being described, but actually observed, acted out, participated in, they take on a different order. Remember, it's Olah, Minha, Shalamim, Hatat, Asam. But when they're actually being acted out, it's Olah, Minha, Hatat, Asam, and Shalamim. It's the peace offering that changes positions. Instead of being third in the list when it's actually acted out, the peace offering occurs last. And I love anomalies because I want to find out, why is this happening like this? Is there a reason behind this? Jacob Milgrom, which is one of the foremost authorities ever on the book of Leviticus, and he passed away some years ago. Dr. Milgrom has written an extensive 4-volume series on the book of Leviticus, and this is what he has to say, and I just completely agree with him. Peace comes as a result of obeying the other 4. Peace is an effect and not a cause. In other words, peace is a fruit and not a gift. You can ask God for peace, and he might give you a temporary sense of his peace, but that long-lasting, abiding peace that we all long for comes as the result of us walking and living in a right relationship with God. You cannot have peace if you are not walking in a consistent right relationship with God. Peace comes as the result of being in that right, that ongoing, living, dynamic relationship with God. The first order places peace third because the sacrifices are being presented in 2 categories. The Olah, Minha, and Shalamim are sweet savor offerings which reach their climax in their effect on Yahweh. To him, these are pleasant odors. The last 2, the Hatat and the Asam, move their climax in indicating their result on the one who gives the offering. The person is forgiven. The 2 sacrifices, Hatat and Asam, deal specifically with the forgiveness of sin. Leviticus 4 through 5 suggests that we risk sinning, and your slides are going to say intentionally, but it should read unintentionally, that we risk sinning unintentionally in 7 different ways. Now, anyone who thought ever that you could not teach or preach the book of Leviticus, what I'm about to give you here, I hope will prove that totally different. We run the risk of unintentionally sinning when number 1, verses 4, 1 through 12, chapter 4, verses 1 through 12, when we cross an unrecognized boundary. Now, there are physical boundaries, land boundaries, but there are also moral and emotional boundaries, and we run the risk of unintentionally sinning when we cross moral and emotional boundaries. That every thing within us is going, don't go there, you don't need to be there, don't go into that room, don't go into this place, don't go into that conversation. And we run the risk of unintentionally sinning when we cross an unrecognized boundary. Chapter 4, verses 13 through 21, when we run with the herd, when we do what everyone else is doing, when we stop thinking for ourselves and we just start moving with the crowd. When we think that our responsibilities exempt us, verses 22 through 26 of Leviticus 4. When we think that our responsibilities exempt us, I'm the pastor. Surely God doesn't think that I'm supposed to read the Bible every day because I'm having to do all this other stuff. Surely God doesn't think I should pray every day and have a devotional life. It's when we think our responsibilities exempt us from doing what is right. And just the opposite of that, chapter 4, verses 27 through 35, when we think that our insignificance excuses us. Well, I'm nothing. It doesn't make any difference if I tithe or not. It makes no difference. I have nothing. I'm not really smart, so it makes no difference whether I do anything for the kingdom of God or not. When we neglect doing something right, chapter 5, verses 1 through 3. When we speak or act impulsively, chapter 5, verses 4 through 13. When we open our mouth and speak before we have gotten it approved by God. When we respond and spit out words that are going to do emotional damage to someone without thinking that through before we say anything. And finally, when we thoughtlessly trivialize the sacred, chapter 5, verses 14 through 16, when we take something that is holy and we begin to trivialize it. And I love comedy, but to be honest with you, I am very uncomfortable with some Christian comedy because it feels like to me they are taking that which is holy and sacred, that which should be separated, and they're using it as fodder for jokes. And that, if you don't have a problem with it, then peace to you. But anytime there's a trivializing of that which is holy or sacred, I find it a bit of a problem. The olah, or the whole burnt offering, is a consecration of oneself. The minhah is a consecration of one's gifts. The hatat is our atonement. The asam is our restoration. And the shalamim is our reconciliation. Now let's look into the New Testament and see what we can find with regard to these offerings. In Ephesians 5:2, Jesus is our whole burnt offering. Just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us as an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. John 12:24, Jesus is our minhah, or grain offering. Unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit. 2 Corinthians 5:21, Jesus is our sin, or hatat, offering. He made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Colossians 2:13 and 14, Jesus is our asam, or guilt offering. When you were dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven us all our transgressions, having cancelled out the certificate of death consisting of decrees against us, which was hostile to us, and he has taken it out of the way, having nailed it to the cross. And finally, in Ephesians 2:14, Jesus is our peace, or shalamim, offering, for he himself is our peace, who made both groups into one and broke down the barrier of the dividing wall. God bless you and have a great second week.